Awesome. Well, thank you everyone for joining us this afternoon. My name is Carolyn Keller. I'm the founder of Curio412, and we are a consultancy for nonprofits and businesses, and we help your organizations make a big impact. So as we've been going through, these next step sessions evolved out of the COVID pandemic, and we continue to provide them once a month to really give you the tools you need and the latest tips, tricks, and trends. And I'm very glad to have Amanda Becker with me today from Appleseed Events to talk more about events. We did a bit of a poll before you all joined us and as you registered, and learned a little bit more about what you were hoping to get out of today. So we'll start to go through that. But Amanda, while I pull our slides up for the presentation, can you introduce yourself to everyone?
Yeah. So I almost said good morning, so you can tell how my week's going. Good afternoon, everybody. I'm Amanda Becker of Appleseed Events. We believe that every event has a potential to grow into something great. So we work with community organizations, nonprofits, small businesses. One of my biggest passions is actually like connecting people who can help each other to accomplish goals. Like people like, hey, you really should meet so-and-so. That's like my favorite thing. So events fit very well into that. I'm very much looking forward to getting back to events. Yes, I've been doing a lot of virtual ones, which I'll be telling you about, but I'm looking forward to seeing actual real humans in the same space, 6 feet apart, yes. So it's nice to meet you all. Some of you I've met or worked with, some of you have worked with your organizations before, so it's nice to have you all here. And Carolyn's always awesome to work with, and she totally understands the way that my brain goes in all these different directions at the same time. So she's great to work with, so thanks for having me.
Thanks, Amanda. I'm going to go ahead and share our screen here. And this is a little bit more about Amanda. As our first slide here, she just told you all about herself, but she is an amazing event planner. I've seen a number of events that she's put together. Very excited to have her here today, and I'm sure that you're going to learn a lot from listening to her. But first, we wanted to go over some of the reasons you might be here today. And we know everyone is dealing with a number of different opportunities that they may have had traditionally in the past from face-to-face for things like fundraisers or educational opportunities, ways that your organizations function through events that they might not have opportunities for. And some of those big things that you mentioned when you registered was you're missing out on those opportunities for educational events, whether that's for children or adults. You're missing out on things like galas and other more high-end get-togethers where people can mix and mingle and have those types of high-end fundraisers, and also just fundraising events in general. So whether you do runs or annual picnics or things that really get all of your members and audiences involved with your organization, there's a lot of missed opportunities on those fronts, but there's also ways that you can make events that are going to give back to your organization. And so that's why when we look through this, we know there are so many options now for events, whether you're doing virtual, thinking about hybrid, or wondering if it's safe to be back in person. And if it is, then what are those parameters that you need to operate in? So Amanda's going to help us by providing some trends about what's been happening and where we're moving for the future, and then some tips for each of these types of events. Virtual was very high on the list of things that everyone who's here today wanted to learn about. So hopefully we'll be able to provide that in addition to more information about hybrid and in person too. But first, if you're in the chat, I want you to answer this question. How do you want your event to give back to your organization? There's a number of ways that our events give back, and we'd like to know what that means to you. So go ahead and throw that in the chat. Amanda and I will both be watching and waiting to learn more from you. Or if you'd like to unmute too, you're more than welcome to tell us how you want an event to give back to your organization.
Recurring donors. Oh yeah, that's a good one.
Love that. Yeah, fundraisers. connecting with people.
I'm excited to talk about that one too. I want people to learn about us and hope the event will help with that and to spread interest.
Yeah, getting more reach is always a great opportunity that you can have with an event.
Education, networking, engaging the public with outreach, networking, building connections, revenue, yep.
Mm-hmm.
Revenue stream is a big give back, yep. And awareness.
Yeah, no, I love all these, especially seeing some of the big topics when Amanda and I were putting this together, just thinking about all the different ways, whether that's through revenue, through making connections, through building deeper relationships with your donors so that they can give back, and their education component too. Spreading awareness is definitely important. So as we think about all events, before Amanda goes into talking about some of those trends and tips that she's seeing in the event industry, the first big thing we wanted to talk about with any event is thinking about your event goal. If you have that goal, determine this first and write that down. You want to make sure that you have it written so that everyone is on the same page, so that you can all understand, here's the types of things that we're working for, and you want to be specific about that. If your primary drive is going to be that revenue stream, you're going to need to build and that fundraising, you're going to need to build that event around maximizing how you're going to bring in that funding for your organization. If your primary aim is going to be awareness, then maybe you're going to focus a little bit more on the marketing and reach that you're going to have through that event. And so thinking about why you're hosting that event in the first place is going to help you really strategize the best way to run that event and the types of content even that you might want to use. So as you're thinking about those goals, you may have multiple goals, but try to think about that primary force that you're going to need to get out of this event. And then as you have that goal, you want to think about the impact that you want this event to have. So any event that you run is going to have an impact not only on your organization, but on the people that come. And you're going to want to take a look at your goal and know, what does it mean that you've reached this goal? So an example of this was I worked with someone who was very interested in having an event, and the primary driver for that was raising awareness. And in the short term, they wanted to raise that awareness. In the long term, they wanted to build donors. And as I worked with this organization, I realized they wanted to streamline things, and they didn't want to collect certain amount of data because they saw it as a barrier to people coming. So we had a great event, but we didn't collect any data from the people that attended. We had no email addresses. We had no way of getting in touch with the people we just made that connection with. So once you have that goal, thinking about the impact it should have on your participants, the impact you want it to have on that organization, that will also help you to strategize, what different pieces do I need to have in place? So not only can I have a great impact on those people when they're at my event, but before and after the event as well. And if you have a long-term strategy for your event, maybe even thinking about what are the different ways that we can follow up, even if it's 1 to 5 years from now. Spoke with another organization who had recently done a wine drive, and she said it was a great event. They had maybe 15 participants, which doesn't seem like a lot. They raised a couple $100, so they didn't raise a ton of money, but in the long term, they, on the whole, had 14 new donors who had never heard of their organization before and had already invested in coming to that virtual wine tasting event. And as you project that out for the long term, if each of those donors continue to have that relationship and the organization does a good job of cultivating that relationship, that money and friend raising over time is going to bring you a much bigger return. So being able to figure out what you want that event to give back, how that event should impact people, really is going to help you to plan out those different strategies. So I'm going to turn it over to Amanda. So now that you're thinking about where you're positioning your event, figuring out, what do you do next? How do you choose between what types of content, what type of platforms, formats? So Amanda, I'm turning it over to you. You're the expert from Appleseed, and thank you so much for being here.
Perfect, thank you. So I don't know if you guys have the capability, but if you don't, you can use the chat. would you please raise your hand if you are currently having discussions with your organization staff or board leadership or volunteers about your next event, and if a lot of those conversations are focusing around if they should be virtual, hybrid, or in person. So just like raise your hand or let me know in the chat. She says, yep, yeah. So, okay, so is anybody not having these conversations? And if so, please let me know what you're talking about, because I think that this is something that a lot of people are talking about right now. A lot of organizations are trying to figure out, and that was kind of where Carolyn and I were coming from as far as this topic and this content. So how do you choose between virtual, hybrid, or in person? How do you possibly make that decision? And is it black and white? You know, like I see in the chat, somebody, you know, they're still in virtual event status. So maybe it's black and white for your organization, or maybe you're somewhere in the gray, or maybe you're not really sure. So one of the things that has become more apparent, at least in my work over the past year or so, is that everything is very fluid. So things are changing very quickly. So you might have the best laid plans for, you know, your events for the next 5 years, but maybe you threw those plans out the window at the start of 2020, or maybe you're still trying to do them, or just kind of somewhere in between. So there's lots of things to consider when you're trying to figure out what type of event you're going to do. So maybe you know you want to do a fundraiser. Maybe you know you want to raise $100,000. You know you want you know, at least 100 new donors out of that event, and you know you want, you know, at least 100 new emails, so, or new contacts for your list. So if you're there, then you did everything that Carolyn was talking about as far as setting very specific goals. And good job. And I hope that everybody on your team was on that same page as far as those are the goals that you want to reach. But if you are there and you're still trying to figure out whether to do virtual, hybrid, or in person, these are some things to start to consider. Number one is the restrictions. So this is kind of funny because people are always asking, like, well, when do you think will be okay to do an in-person event? I get that question like almost every day. And I tell them, well, like, do you have an in with the governor's office? Like, do you have an in with somebody else that I don't? Can you read minds? Can you tell the future? Because I have no idea. So all of that joking aside, there's lots of things to consider, one of which is the restriction. So if you're in Pennsylvania, which I think most of the registrants that registered for this were in Pennsylvania, there were a few from out of state. So if you're from out of state, you could just be excited for us. But if you're in Pennsylvania, the governor just announced, I think it was 2 days ago, that as of April 4th, those restrictions are going to change. And they're going to get a little less strict here in Pennsylvania when it comes to events and event capacity. No matter where you are, that's going to be something that you're going to want to consider. Yes, safety is one, the overall topic of safety, but we're going to talk about that kind of further down the road in this presentation. But when you're trying to figure out if you're going to be able to host an in-person event, restrictions are definitely something you should look at, because while we don't know necessarily what they're going to be in the future, we do know what they are now, and we know what they have been over the past year. That's something that you need to look at to see if it's even feasible for you to host an in-person event or not. So if you're in Pennsylvania, it has been not only sunny, at least where I live in Pennsylvania, but the governor announced that these restrictions are going to be a little less strict. So it's been a great week, and there's been a lot of excitement around events, at least the ones that I've been working on this week. So that's been great. Next thing to consider is your goal. So if your goal is to get, you know, say 100 new contacts on your list, whether those are new potential donors or whatever that type of contact is for your organization, you're going to want to consider the best format for that. So maybe that's your goal, and you're able to do that in virtual, hybrid, or in person. So then you should kind of keep on moving down this line to see what your other priorities are. But definitely, you know, in all aspects of your planning, keep the goal at the top of your list and right in front of your whole team, not just you, but your whole leadership team. And then costs. So costs are related to dollars, and that next one is time. So I'll be sharing a little bit more about some of my recent events soon, but one thing that I realized recently is that virtual events actually, while there's a lot less dollars that usually go towards them, because you're usually not doing catering and a venue fee and some of those other things that go with in-person. You know, people don't have to pay to travel. There can be a lot more time dedicated to those virtual events. So depending on what you're trying to accomplish, I would look at those things very closely to try to figure out. It's not always just black and white. Virtual is, you know, less expensive to do than in person. And then I want you to look at your skill set. So if you have a board that is very excited about technology, then, or if you have a leadership team or a group of volunteers, whatever that is, if you have people that are really excited about technology, then you may not be shy about, you know, doing more virtual events, and it can be a great solution. But if you traditionally have a group of people that are working with you, or your target audience is not very tech savvy, then that's something you want to look very closely at. Not to say that you can't do a virtual or a hybrid event, but you want to look at the ways that you're going to do that to make sure that it's actually accessible to everyone. So like I said, we are going to talk about a little bit about safety kind of as we go in the presentation, but obviously, yes, safety. I think somebody said something about guest comfort. I kind of tie that right in with safety because different people have different comfort levels when it comes to that. So we're going to be talking about some ways to attract people on all different spectrums when it comes to that comfort level. So there's lots of different things to consider. That's just kind of an overview of some things to look at when you're trying to choose a format. And then I wanted to give you some very specific examples of some things that I've done with some of my clients and some of my events over the past year or so that will give you some examples just of different ways to approach these types of events. So we're going to talk about virtual events first. And a lot of you, when you filled out your registration page and that survey, said that you're interested in learning more about virtual events. So there's a ton of information out there, and Carolyn will tell you, I went like full on nerd with this presentation and like trying to gather all kinds of information. And then I realized that like we have less than an hour, and that's ridiculous. So we're going to do kind of an overview of all of these things, and then I'm sure you all will have questions. But these statistics might not surprise you that 76% of planners said that they were going to go virtual for this coming year. But it may surprise you, or maybe something to think about, that 80% of virtual engagement is expected to take place on demand. So this webinar here is a great example. So we had, I think, like, and I hope you don't, I should have asked Carolyn, I hope you don't mind me sharing. I think we had about 60 people register for the event. I don't know how many people we have on at this moment, maybe 20, 30, I didn't count. But this is a great example because a lot of people are going to be watching this afterwards. So how many of you have done that, where you like register for a webinar and you either A, can't stand to be on a screen booked, or you forgot, or your kid needs help with virtual, whatever it is, and you don't actually make it live to the webinar. So what I mean by on demand is basically like your television. So like you save it for later. So Carolyn, at the end of this session, she had mentioned she's recording at least this part. She's going to send out the recording to everybody that was registered, and they're going to watch it afterwards. So they're going to be watching the on-demand version. So while engagement is a top challenge for virtual events, and that's a challenge that a lot of people, you know, cite as something that's a little bit difficult, is how to actually interact with people. Yes, that's a challenge, but there's really, how are you going to engage with those people that are watching it on demand afterwards? Is it necessary to engage with them? What are the benefits? You know, how, just something to consider as you're planning your content. And also the format of your virtual event is that a lot of people are going to be watching the recording afterwards and not necessarily live. You can have it on the background, you're doing dishes, you know, whatever that is. So I wanted to give you an example real quick of a virtual conference that we just did. So Appleseed worked with this organization last year. It was an in-person event. There were about 300 people. Remember the days when we could have 300 people in the same room. It was an educational conference with some networking built in. So the speakers, there's a specific theme of speakers. The speakers came from all over the country, and it was a Friday afternoon into early evening. So in about October of this year, we sat down over a screen and tried to figure out how we were going to move forward for 2021's event. Now, this event was in February. So again, we're trying to tell what's coming next, what are we going to be allowed to do, what's going to be safe, what are people going to be comfortable with, etc. We did land eventually on a virtual format. And I wanted to share a little bit about what this organization did really well with this virtual format, because we have started to receive a lot of feedback because it was at the end of February. So I have a little bit of that, but it also was a really great learning experience. First off, when you talk about trying to decide whether you're going to go virtual, hybrid, or in person, when we talk about that, looking at the time and the actual dollars cost, I looked at this event and I tried to estimate how much time it was going to take. And I'll tell you, at the end of the event, I spent probably twice as much time, if not almost 3 times as much time on this virtual conference as I had initially budgeted. Now, I charge my clients a flat fee, so the client was fine. The event ended up going great, but I'm telling you that because a lot of you are planning events for your own organization. You know, the planning is internal. Just because it's a virtual event does not mean that it's not going to take you a lot of time. And we'll talk about some of the reasons for that. But one of the things that they did great with this virtual conference, they had speakers from all over the country. One of the positives of a virtual conference is you can have a wide variety of speakers from a wide variety of locations. It's cheaper in that way because they didn't have to travel. So we didn't have to pay travel expenses. We didn't have to pay hotel expenses. We didn't have to pay for meals. We just had to pay their speaker fees. And some speakers, to be honest, didn't even have a fee, or there was a prior relationship or something like that. So one of the things that was great is the quality of speakers was fantastic. All of our speakers had previous experience with speaking in virtual events. So one of the things to keep in mind, as a lot of you are doing these virtual events that focus around education, if I remember correctly, one of the things to keep in mind is the speaker experience. So yes, the attendee experience is important, but make sure that you're sharing information with your speakers about what format you're going to be using, what's going to be on their screen. So for example, we used Zoom webinar for a portion of this conference. And with Zoom webinar, unlike Zoom meetings, which is what we're in now, Zoom meetings, you can see, you know, the screen and the speaker, or you can see all the little boxes, which are oftentimes a lot of black boxes with names. With Zoom webinar, you don't see any of that. So they weren't going to be seeing the facial reactions of the people in the virtual audience. They were only going to be seeing the MC. They were going to be seeing their slides. It was important for them to know that they might be seeing some chat or some Q&A, but that they weren't going to be expected to answer those. There was going to be other people actually feeding those questions to them. It was important for them to obviously have the correct link. It was important for them to know that they should test their things ahead of time. So you might think that that's obvious, but we actually had like a whole sheet for them that we sent to them ahead of time. There was a link on it where they could test their microphone and their camera ahead of time. I was telling Carolyn, 2 days before this event, I logged on a different call and my camera stopped working on my computer. So I shared that story with all of our speakers. And I said, look, I know you've done a lot of virtual events and a lot of speaking engagements, but technology does occasionally need an update here and there, or something happens. So please just test it the day out. I told them to check all of their backgrounds. So we had one speaker that had pictures that his grandkids had drawn in the background. And that was really cute. And he actually asked us, because we did prep calls with all of our speakers ahead of time. He said, is that okay? Is that appropriate? And of course it was awesome. And only added to the personality. So another thing that we did with those speakers is we had a prep call beforehand. Now for that type of an event, I would highly recommend that. What that meant was each speaker could actually have FaceTime with me as the planner, and then with 2 of the people on the planning committee from that organization. That might seem like a little thing, but we had been emailing back and forth with a lot of these speakers, and they had different contact with different people. So the fact that they could actually build a little bit of a relationship with actual faces was very important. It made them feel a lot more confident kind of going into the event. They knew a little bit more about what to expect. So with virtual events, those are just some things to keep an eye on. Another thing that we looked at, and this is, I'm sure that with virtual events, you might be having these conversations in your organization, and you can let me know in the chat, but is anybody trying to figure out if you're pre-recording or if you're going to do it live? This is a big discussion. We had this discussion a million times with the organization I just worked with. What we landed on actually worked extremely well, and I would recommend that you at least look at this option for your organization. We left it up to the speakers. We said you can speak live or you can pre-record. Every speaker except for one decided to speak live. That was something that they wanted to do. So they, all their technology worked, praise the Lord, but one of them actually had a scheduling conflict. So he had to pre-record his. Everybody else was live. And to add to that, not only were they live, so it was a little bit more engaging than a pre-recorded can be, they also volunteered to do Q&As afterwards. So they didn't know what questions were going to be coming up. We had an MC that was fabulous. That was key for this virtual event, is we had an MC that has been an MC before. So just some of the things that we did, like I said, we made there was the one pre-recorded and there were the other ones that were all live. And they did the live Q&A afterwards. So that was really key for engagement. And we got some really good feedback from our attendees about how they felt that it was more of a conference. Sometimes with a bunch of pre-recorded videos, it can feel like you're watching YouTube videos or something like that. And that might be fine for what you're trying to accomplish. But for this organization, that's not what they wanted. Another thing that we looked at was camera angles. So for the one that was pre-recorded, and then for the other, we had a few short sponsor videos in there. It was important to us that the videos were shot not just completely head on like a Zoom screen, but that there were kind of multiple angles to switch it up. Every speaker only spoke for 20 minutes max. So while these speakers are used to doing keynotes that are maybe almost an hour long, it was a big transition to them, and they were shocked when we told them they could only speak for 20 minutes. But their content was amazing, and that way, the things that were on the screen, it was changing all the time. So it wasn't just a bunch of slides, it wasn't one speaker, it was like all different things all the time, and it kept people's attention a lot more. We were thrilled to see the rate of engagement as far as people that were actually watching live throughout, because we could see those numbers. And I think that was a big part of that, is how we would kind of just constantly kept switching it up. Now for us, for the organization and this conference that we worked on, we decided that overproduced was maybe not as genuine. So it depends on what you're trying to accomplish, and you can argue me here. You may have a different opinion, but we felt like minor technical things that actually, and we didn't plan on minor technical things, but things come up here and there, very minor and very quick, that actually showed that there were real humans behind the scenes, and it made everybody a little bit more, they could relate to it a little bit more. So that, combined with the content and all of these other things, actually ended up working really well. One of the things that I was reading recently was about virtual events in the context of like, why can't you engage people on virtual events when people will watch Netflix for hours and hours and hours on end? Like, that's virtual, and people will do that, and they won't. So I thought that was an interesting conversation. And basically what the point of it was to create what they call bingeable content. You need to have virtual event speakers that are good, that they know what they're doing. They have spoke to virtual audiences before, etc. But they have to be good at storytelling, and they have to be relatable. So if people feel those things, then they're more likely to stick it out, whether they're watching it live or they're watching it afterwards. So there's a lot of good information out there about virtual events, as far as that would be like more of an educational or conference type of virtual event. Another one is fundraisers. A lot of you had said that you're trying to raise funds, and maybe one of the ways that you're looking to do that, or that you've done that before, is virtually. This is something that I saw, there's an organization that's going to be doing it in the coming months, and they were telling me about this. And this ties in with fundraising, but it also ties in with educational events. So have any of you done a virtual event where you were mailed something in the mail, like as a surprise, or maybe you even knew that it was coming? So you can let me know if you have, or tell me about it, but there's a few different benefits to that. Yes, it adds a cost, but it can also be like a really nice thing for attendees to get, as well as far as like a positive surprise. So they're going to take a picture of it. They're going to post it on their social media. They're going to talk about it more. So if one of your goals is to create engagement on social or awareness and things like that, then sending them something might help towards that. For a fundraising perspective, you have that law of reciprocity. So like you're mailing them something, and maybe it's something small. Maybe it's like an engraved wine glass because it's a virtual gala or whatever. But that law of reciprocity says that they're going to want to kind of help you in return because you gave them something. So that's a very non-scientific definition of that. But there's a lot of ways that could help you. The other thing is different people have different learning styles. So to have something that they can actually like have or hold and touch is a different type of sensory experience. So maybe it's going to make your content, your event, whatever it is, a little bit more memorable. So I could talk forever about all of these things, but I just wanted to kind of share that little bit about kind of mailing something. One of the examples I wanted to give as far as a virtual fundraiser, this organization is on the call, and she didn't know I was going to talk about this, and she can share a little bit more maybe. But in the fall, there was an organization that did a very successful auction. And there were lots of things that made it successful. And I have a client that's talking about doing something similar to this in this coming fall. But one of the things that made it so successful is one, they had a dedicated team, which any type of event, whether it's virtual or in person, a dedicated team is very helpful. Their auction items, they had good pictures of their auction items. So it was an online auction. It's key that you have good pictures and good description so people actually know what they're bidding on. And then another thing that they did is one of the platforms that they used actually text reminded you. So like if you bid on something and somebody outbid you, I did this a few times where I got a text and it said, oh, you've been outbid. And I can just like click the button. My credit card was already in there from my initial bid and I can bid up. So by encouraging people to increase their bids like that, you make it really easy. There's a very low barrier of entry to an event like that. You know, it's a free event. It's a virtual event. They had some videos that were like the event portion. The auction went, I think, for about a week. But rather than have a fee or a ticket price that you have to pay to get into a traditional in-person gala, you don't have to do that. So maybe the money that you would normally spend on that, people are going to spend on their bidding, and they're going to do it really easily from their phone. So there were a lot of things that were very good about what they did, but those are some of the things that I really liked. I thought that was really well done as far as a virtual fundraiser. And then as far as platforms, there's a million of them out there. We can talk a little bit more about those in a bit. Last example when it comes to a network or a virtual event is a networking event, because I'm sure all of you by this point have tried virtual networking. Maybe you like it, maybe you don't, maybe you're still trying to figure it out, or you're trying to host a virtual networking event. So I did one for a client at Christmas time. We used a platform called Purr, like the cat that's on the TV or the cat that's on the screen right now. The platform has a free version. There's also a paid version. They're not paying me to say this, but I really enjoyed the experience. They have a trivia platform on there, and then they just opened up a bingo one. For this event, it's a professional organization. They had been doing educational events virtually throughout the year, but they wanted to do something that was a little bit more social with a little bit of networking. And the trivia on Purr was a great way to kind of break the ice with everybody. Everybody kept their cameras on. They were able to play the trivia actually on their phone. And it was a really nice way to just kind of like see people, to wish them happy holidays, to kind of check in. The whole event was maybe only an hour, but I would recommend having some sort of an icebreaker with your virtual networking event, just like you would in person. So maybe you ask everybody the same question. Maybe you say, okay, tell me one thing that you're really looking forward to doing this summer, or tell me what you really miss about being in the office, or whatever that question is, just to kind of get people started as an icebreaker. Maybe it is the trivia game. And then another one that I saw recently, which I really liked, was breakout rooms. So Zoom has a feature called breakout rooms, and the organization that I saw that's doing this has the breakout rooms by different themes. So if you're looking for a job, or if you're looking to hire, you put yourself into that breakout room. If you're a young professional looking to meet other young professionals, you put yourself into that breakout room. If you're looking for more ways to volunteer, so this is a nonprofit doing this, you put yourself into that breakout room. So it was just a way to kind of connect with people that might have similar goals as you. but to do that in an online format rather than like everybody staring at each other on a screen with all these little boxes. So there's just a few tips related to virtual networking events, and then there was fundraising, and then the educational kind of conferences. Next up, I wanted to tell you a little bit about hybrid events. And like I said, I'm sorry, this is a lot of information. It's probably way too much information, but at least it's an introduction and some things for you to think about and to consider for your next events. So for hybrid events, I've heard it said that hybrid is the future of events. We will see. I think any event has an ideal format, but I think that this time is a great opportunity to be creative. So what I mean by hybrid is, like it says there, a mix of live and virtual. So they don't necessarily require the high-end technology. There's different ways to do this, but one thing to remember all the time is that no matter where your audience is, if they're on the screen virtually or if they're in the same room, they want to be part of something bigger. That's something that everybody wants all the time. So keep that in mind, keep the goals of your event in mind as you're trying to figure out how to pull off this hybrid event. One idea for a hybrid event that I came across recently with a client, it's a fundraiser, or they want to hold a fundraiser, but they also want to generate some awareness. They did not nail down specific goals yet, but that's going to be one of their next steps. They talked about doing an auction. So that's going to be just a part of the event. And they said, well, what if people aren't comfortable coming out in person by, I think they were talking about doing in this September. I said, well, that might be the case, but you can also give people the opportunity to participate virtually. So another benefit to that is this organization in particular has a lot of supporters here in Western PA, but there's an area of New York where about half of their board is from there, and a lot of supporters in that area as well. So by having a live event here and an in-person event in Western PA, if they add the virtual part to make it a hybrid event, they can actually increase the number of their current donors and supporters that are able to participate. So one of the things they talked about doing was an auction. So the way that they're going to do that is by taking good pictures of really attractive auction items. So there's going to be that's like a whole seminar in itself, with great auction items. So we can talk about that at a later date if anybody has any of those questions, but take great pictures of interesting auction items, write clear descriptions on them, and then they're going to open up their auction online. So they're going to have an in-person event, and I think it's going to be a mini golf event, which is going to be really fun. But they're also going to open just the auction portion of their event up online. And the way those two things are going to be working together is everybody is going to be bidding on their phones. So whether they're in person or virtual, they can bid using the same platform. So it's not like you're going to have to be FaceTiming people and saying, oh, what was your bid? And then writing it down on the paper. And they're going to have it all on the same platform. So it's all kind of going to work together, and there's going to be different ways for people to interact within that. So maybe it's a Facebook group, or maybe it's like a chat thread within the app. We haven't determined the specifics of that yet, but there's going to be little ways for them to interact. But basically the point is people can participate in some way, whether they're virtual or in person. So there's a lot of different ways to do that. I would say don't force interaction. So don't assume that the people that are attending your event virtually are going to want to talk to everybody that's in the room, and vice versa. They might not want to. You might want to give them opportunities to interact, but don't assume that that's something that they're looking for. Think about ways that you can engage both audiences, whether they are virtual or in person. Again, that doesn't have to be the same way, but don't ignore one audience over the other. One of the things I saw, which is something to consider moving forward, is the idea of a concierge for a hybrid event. So I haven't tried this before. I don't know if I would try it. I don't know if I have the right event. But their idea was basically like you partner people up. So somebody that's virtual and somebody that's in person. And you basically say like, okay, you guys are event buddies. And the person that's in person is a concierge for the person that's attending virtually. So they say, hey, look at this. And I don't know how this would work. I thought it was an interesting idea. I think that it's something that would be worth exploring. And I think maybe we'll see something similar to this kind of moving forward. But I don't have a lot of specifics on how it would work. So part of what I wanted to do here today is to give you guys some ideas. Again, people want to feel like they're a part of something bigger. If you put a camera in the back of the room in say the Westin in Pittsburgh, where it's a huge, I think that space can hold upwards of 1,000 people, and you put a camera in the back of the room and all the people virtually are going to be able to see the whole crowd. They might not even be able to see the speaker. Are they going to be able to hear the speaker? Like, I encourage you to just be a little bit more creative than that. Maybe it's something as simple as just moving the camera to a better location, but just make sure you're constantly thinking about both audiences. I would say hybrid events are going to take at least twice as much work in most cases, but they're definitely going to be something to consider, even if it's just a small portion of your event being hybrid. And then last is, and I know I'm like talking forever, so we'll talk about in-person last, and I want to share a few different trends and just, again, kind of small ideas, because in-person events are going to be starting again. I know Appleseed is planning in-person events for July and August. Our events that we have are very large, but we have a ton of safety considerations that we're thinking of as we're talking about moving into in-person events. I have a ton of information on my website, my social media, email list. We can talk about that more later, so you can hear more about this in those ways. But just real quick, people are going to be craving meaningful connections. So think about you as the organization, as the event planner within your organization, how you're going to actually encourage meaningful connections with people. So what does that mean? That might mean prioritizing the networking portion of your event over the education portion of your event as you get back to in-person. That could mean a bunch of different things, but think about the fact that even introverts now are craving meaningful connection with other people. So see how you can use that with your next events. I think this is obvious, but focus on safety and visible sanitation procedures. So this is going to be key after this year. This is going to be key for many years. You should always have your eye on safety related to an event. Even pre-COVID, you should have a safety plan, but just some things to think about with your event. So things like food service. You want to consider how you're going to be serving people food and where. So say you have a conference and a part of that is a meal. So obviously people have to take their masks off to eat a meal. So they take their mask off, they eat their meal, and then if you have your speakers starting back in the same room as you, people might not remember to put their mask back on. Like, they're not doing it on purpose, but they might not remember because they just ate. So maybe consider having your speaker in a different room than your meal or your networking with the happy hour, so that people actually, by moving to a different space, remember to put their mask back on. That's something small, but it's something to consider. Consider the way that you're serving food. So are you going to have a big charcuterie board? I love a good charcuterie board, but are you going to have that and people are going to, grab the tongs and they're going to pick out their own cheeses and fruits and whatever? Or are you going to have, cones? I don't know if you've seen like charcuterie cones, where it's kind of each a single serving. So everybody just kind of grabs their single serving. It's these little things that are somebody mentioned comfort level before. A lot of this is about safety and a lot of this is about comfort level, and there's a lot of crossover with those two topics. So just think about things that people are going to be a little bit squeamish about, or maybe a lot of it squeamish about, and see what you can do to address those things. Obviously, you want to space out your attendees as much as possible. Think about areas where you might have a line, and think about ways that you can get rid of that line. So can you do more of your registration process through people's phones, where they get to the event, they scan the QR code on their phone and they're automatically checked in, and maybe you have a printer right there that prints their name tag. So people don't have to wait in line at a registration table once they get to an event. There's a ton of different things that you can do related to these topics, but there's just some quick ideas. Real quick, reevaluating alcohol. So something that you should, and I love a good glass of wine, so don't hate on me for saying reevaluating alcohol, but some people don't drink. There is a liability when it comes to alcohol. Those things haven't changed from before COVID and to after COVID. One of the things to think about with alcohol is, again, people are gonna have to be taking their masks off and they might not remember to put them back on. Is alcohol necessary? Is it something that you want? If that is something that you want, make sure that you have good non-alcoholic drinks there as well. Saying this as somebody who was pregnant and going to events for 9 months, and there's like just water for the person that doesn't drink alcohol. Okay, maybe that's great. But if you're gonna have like fun themed cocktails, consider having fun themed mocktails as well. Just again, something to think about. There's lots of things to think about as far as using, we just have on here nostalgia, gamification, and mystery. So I can't get into those right now, but we can talk more about those at a later date just because we're running out of time. There's a million things that you can do with in-person events, not only to make them safe and to make people feel comfortable, but also refresh them a little bit. A lot of your organizations may have been doing the same events for years and years and years now. And this is a great excuse, not like you needed one, to rethink your event approach. So just because you've done an in-person gala and you've done it in a certain way for I don't care how many years, and that board member loves that event and whatever, like this is a good excuse to try to think fresh. People are not only going to be craving meaningful connections, but they're going to be really looking for creative things. If they're leery about leaving their house and or going to an event, you really have to give them a reason to come out and do something. Make it creative. Ticket prices are going to go up. That's a whole other topic when we can talk a little bit about financials, but pricing for events is going to go up. That's just how it's going to happen. You're going to have to give people a reason to actually be there, whether it's virtual or in person or hybrid. A little bit about structuring your fees. Consider the VIP option. Sometimes that's a way to get a little bit of extra money for a ticket price for not as much of an extra fee. It can be a great sponsorship option. FOMO pricing. So this is basically saying, hey, we only have 10 tickets at this price, and maybe it's a super discounted price and everybody else is full price. That really gets people in the door to buy your tickets right away, and it generates some excitement. So that's just something to consider. I think I've talked for like way too long, so I'm gonna hold off right now. I think the next slide might be about sponsorship, but that can be its like whole other thing. Basically with sponsorship, just real quick, think about what's actually in it for your sponsors, and don't just tell them about your organization. Your organizations do great things. I know that they're probably amazing, but from a business perspective, sponsors need to see and know how this is going to benefit them, what it's going to make them feel like, how it's going to affect their bottom line, et cetera, et cetera. So what kind of questions do we have? I talked really fast and I talked a lot. So did any of that make sense or help anybody? Let me see the chat here.
Sounds great, Amanda. I'm going to go ahead and stop our recording. And if anyone wants to unmute or come on with their cameras, we welcome the Q&A and discussion portion too. We know that we have limited time, but want to give you as much time to ask questions and learn from Amanda.